Hello. So my project is understanding fatigue and analysis of sustained effort in the effort expenditure for rewards task. So just to introduce myself, my name is Harsheen. I am a senior at Rutgers University, and this project is my honors thesis in cognitive science under Dr. David Zald of the Cognitive Science Department at Rutgers. So just some background on my project. So why am I even studying fatigue? What is the importance of studying fatigue? So fatigue is a pretty ubiquitous symptom in both mental and physical health. The current literature about fatigue primarily focuses on defining and measuring fatigue because it is such a ubiquitous symptom with a huge range of the way it presents in different populations. So given that it is a very ubiquitous symptom for the context of my project, I am defining fatigue as an acute mental fatigue, and which can be described as a mental resource depletion in the face of external demands. And this is a depletion over time. So it is a dependent on time, the passage of time. So a little bit about the effort expenditure for rewards task, or EFERT. This was a task designed to essentially measure trait anhedonia in clinical populations. So anhedonia can be defined as a common symptom in different psychological conditions, very common in major depressive disorder. And basically, in layman's terms, it's typically defined as a lack of pleasure. But looking into anhedonia, there are actually a few different components to it. One of them being known as reward wanting versus reward liking. So basically what that means is anhedonia can be broken into these two subcomponents of reward wanting, which is actually your hedonic capacity, or your ability to enjoy rewards after a given stimuli or a completion of a certain task. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I mixed that up. That would be reward liking. And then reward wanting is the actual motivation to complete a certain task or to achieve a certain reward. So there's a very subtle difference in these two subcomponents, but it does exist. And so the effort expenditure for rewards task is specifically looking at reward wanting, or the motivation to gain such rewards. So essentially, the way that the effort expenditure for rewards task is laid out, it is a button press task, and participants are given two choices: a high effort choice, which is associated with a high reward, and a low effort choice, which is associated with the probability of a lower reward, a monetary reward. And so as a participant goes through the trials of this task, the difficulty of the different options is modulated by the number of button presses you have to do, the time you have to complete those button presses, as well as whether or not you can use your dominant or non-dominant finger to complete those button presses. So that's what makes the distinction between high effort and low effort. And so the EFERT task, which had already been completed a few years ago, has successfully shown a correlation between those presenting with trait anhedonia and choosing low effort options, which speaks to the reward wanting, or rather the deficit in reward wanting for those experiencing trait anhedonia. So in this current study, I'm essentially going to be looking at the EFERT and analyzing specific variables of the EFERT to look for a measurement of fatigue. So as I explained previously, the task is conducted over multiple trials. So one of the variables in the EFERT is the trial number. And so the reason that I'll be looking at trial number as a potential indication of fatigue is because, as I described before, for the context of this study, fatigue can be measured as a depletion of mental resources as a variable of time. So trial number is indication of passage of time, because the higher the trial number, the farther along you are in the task. So that is one variable I will be looking at as an indication of fatigue within the effort. And then another variable I will be looking at is whether or not the prior trial was a high effort or a low effort trial. So basically, the idea behind that is looking at, if you were to expend acute effort, does that later affect your choice in the immediate trial to follow, in the probability of choosing a higher effort option or the lower effort option. So these are the two variables I will be using to essentially look for a measurement of fatigue throughout the effort trials for participants. So I essentially did a binary linear regression for both of these variables. And what this does is basically look at the variable and predict the probability of choosing high or low effort options as a result of, and as I described, the trial number and the prior trial. So just to give you some numbers, the results show that for the trial number, the regression coefficient was negative 0.017, and the expected B is 0.983. And then for the prior trial, the regression coefficient was 0.430, and the expected B was 1.538. So what these numbers mean is essentially that for the trial number, there is a negative correlation between the trial number and the hard choice option. So essentially what that means is, as the trial number increases, meaning the farther along you are within the task, the probability of choosing the harder choice or the harder effort option is going to decrease, which is indicative of fatigue, because as I defined earlier, fatigue is the depletion of mental resources over time. So the probability of choosing a higher effort option over time is therefore indicative of fatigue. And then for the prior trial status being a hard choice or easier choice, there is actually a positive correlation, which essentially means that if the prior trial you just completed was a hard choice, the probability that you will then choose the hard choice option in the next trial actually increases, which is kind of the opposite of what I predicted. And so this is not a variable that can be used to indicate fatigue during the effort task. So essentially, what we learned from the study is that the trial number variable in the effort can be used as an indication of fatigue for participants as they are going throughout the effort. And so the implications of this is that along with the effort being a measurement for trait anhedonia, it can also be looked at as a measurement for fatigue or the sustenance of effort over time. So a few questions that definitely need to be answered in this area of work is there an interaction between trait anhedonia and fatigue? So the population that I specifically looked at was a clinical population. So everyone in the data set had presented with trait anhedonia. So it's difficult to separate, well, okay, did we see this fatigue trend with the trial number because the population had trait anhedonia? So I think it would be interesting to see a comparison between clinical and non-clinical populations to see if there is some sort of interaction between the two, which wouldn't come as a surprise since these are both two very big symptom categories and major depressive disorder. So there could be a potential correlation between the two. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.